dear learners. I am Ma'am Grace Ulutukit, your grade 7 English teacher. Today is another day to learn something new. I will be your learning buddy and let's discover new concepts and skills, especially in this lesson titled Transcoding Information Through Linear and Nonlinear Text and Vice Versa. Let me share you first this simple quotation which says, "Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, but involve me and I learn." That's why I am expecting you to learn from this discussion by actively participating in all the activities that I'm giving to you. Are you ready to join me and learn in today's lesson? There you go. So get ready with your ball pen, your paper, and of course, your learning activity sheet. And I'm sure you will all have a fun and meaningful learning today. But before that, let us have first a short review of our previous discussion in Module 6, which is using analogies. Can you still remember what an analogy is?
That's right. Analogy is a comparison between two things on the basis of their structure and for the purpose of explanation or clarification. Let us find out if you can still remember our discussion about using analogies. Kindly get a piece of paper and try to answer the following questions. You're going to write true if the statement is correct and false if it is wrong. Can we now start? Analogy can show comparisons between unrelated things. You're right. Analogies can be used to show comparisons between unrelated things. Analogy can be used in describing a person or place. That is true. Analogy can be used in describing a person or place. Number 3, analogy is another term for simile. That is false. Although analogy has similarities with simile and metaphor, analogy does not only compare concepts, but more so elaborates through logical reasoning using description and persuasion. Analogy can be used in explaining a point or a complex subject. This statement is true. Analogy can be used in explaining a point or a complex subject. And for the last item, analogy can be used to describe and link an unfamiliar idea with common object. Yes, this statement is true. Analogy can be used to describe and link an unfamiliar idea with common object. This Venn diagram shows the comparisons among analogy, simile, and metaphor. Using this Venn diagram, we can clearly see the similarities and differences among these three concepts. As we go on to our discussion, we're going to find out more examples of Venn diagrams which we can use on how are we going to present information. Take note that analogy is part of our everyday language and is therefore used in oral and written communication. As such, analogy can be used in describing a person or place, explaining a complex subject, linking unfamiliar idea with common object, and catching the attention of the readers or listeners. Although analogy has similarities with simile and metaphor, analogy does not only compare concepts, but more so elaborates through logical reasoning using description and persuasion.
Do you still have questions in using analogies? I think you all understood and learned this topic. Don't forget that you can make use of analogies even in your daily conversations. And surely you will have fun in analyzing the logic between the comparisons. Let us now move forward to our new lesson titled Transcoding Information from Linear to Nonlinear Text and Vice Versa. Are you familiar with this linear text and nonlinear texts? As a learner, you are taught to read from left to right or from beginning to end, just as when you are reading comprehension passages, short stories, poems, essays, and letters. However, this is not the only way of reading. To become an efficient reader, you have to train yourself to read different texts in different ways. At the end of this lesson, you are expected to identify the linear and nonlinear text, differentiate linear from nonlinear text, and transcode information from a given linear to nonlinear text and vice versa.
To begin with, let us have this warm-up activity. Kindly get your pen and paper and try to answer this test. Identify the given examples and tell whether it is a linear or nonlinear text. Number 1. Novel. That's right. Novel is an example of a linear text. Number 2. Essay. Very good. Essay is an example of a linear text. Number 3. Poem. You're doing great. Poem is an example of a linear text. Number 4. World map. You're right. World map is an example of a nonlinear text. Number 5. Venn diagram. Very good. A Venn diagram is an example of a nonlinear text. And lastly, number 6. Flowchart. Wow, that's great. Flowchart is an example of a nonlinear text. If you got 4 out of 6 in this activity, it was a great start. And you will find out more about linear and nonlinear texts as we go on to our discussion. Let us have this another activity. You are going to group the following pictures according to their similarities. Connect the picture to its appropriate group. Each group is labeled as A, which are the pictures that use text that need to be read from beginning to end, and B, which are the pictures that do not need to be read from beginning to end. You can make use of this table as your guide in grouping the pictures according to its content. These are the answers for this activity. If you're going to compare the column A with column B, what do you think are the differences between the two groups? Which group has those texts which can be easily read? How about the group which needs time to finish reading? Understanding the differences between linear and nonlinear text is an essential skill as we encounter these texts almost every day. The main differences between the two lies in the way the text is read or processed by an individual. Experts call this pattern of reading a material as reading path. Let us differentiate linear text from nonlinear text using this table. This table shows the differences between linear text and nonlinear text, according to their definition, the reading path, content, efficiency, and examples. Based on the table, what do you think are the differences between the linear text from a nonlinear text in terms of reading path? Based on the examples given, what subject areas can we usually see linear text? How about nonlinear texts? Today, we are going to discuss 5 examples of nonlinear text. Line graph is a graphical display of information that uses line to represent the data that changes continuously over time. A bar graph is a graphical representation of data that uses bars to compare data according to given categories. Such bars may run vertically or horizontally. A pie graph is a circular statistical tool that uses portions or slices to represent numerical proportions or percentages of a given whole. Venn diagram uses overlapping shapes, usually circles, to show or represent the similarities and differences between two or more items or concepts. In using Venn diagram, first, write down the topics being compared on top of each circle. In this example, flu and COVID-19 are being compared. Next, write down the differences or unique characteristics inside its own sector, avoiding the overlapping area. This one. This part are for COVID-19, the red part, and for the blue part are for the flu or influenza. Lastly, list the similarities in the common area. In this part, the overlapping part of the circles, these are the similarities of both flu and COVID-19. A sequence chart is a graphic sequence organizer that helps visualize the order of steps of a process or a timeline of events. In using sequence chart, first identify the steps in the process and then arrange these steps in sequential order. Transcoding linear to nonlinear text and vice versa. Don't forget, to transcode means to transform something from one form to another. To transcode a linear to a nonlinear text or the other way around, one must first be able to fully understand what the source text is about. This way, deciding on the proper text type to be used in the transcoding process will be easier. To transcode a linear text to a nonlinear text, one may follow these steps. Step 1. Read and understand the source text to get its main central ideas. Step 2. Extract important details to be included in the visual presentation. Step 3. Remember to use words or phrases only. Step 4. To be organized, classify information into categories. Step 5. Make sure to use appropriate nonlinear text presenting your information. This is an example of a linear text in which you are going to read and find out the correct nonlinear text to be used in order to present the information given in this text. To help you identify the appropriate nonlinear text to be used in this activity, you can answer these process questions. Number 1. Based on the text, what is the similarity between influenza and COVID-19? Number 2. What is the difference between influenza and COVID-19? Number 3. If the paragraph suggests similarities and differences between influenza and COVID-19, what nonlinear text should be used to illustrate its similarities and differences? And lastly, number 4, using the statements lifted from the paragraph, transcode the linear text into Venn diagram. What type of nonlinear text is this? If you answered Venn diagram, that is correct. A Venn diagram uses overlapping shapes to show or represent the similarities and differences between two or more items or concepts. In this activity, we compared influenza and COVID-19. As we make use of this Venn diagram, first, write down the topics being compared on top of each circle. As you can see, we make use or we wrote the title on top of each circle or the topic. Then, write down the differences or unique characteristics inside its own sector. So for this part, influenza cause mild to severe illness. The symptoms develop from 1 to 4 days. Compared to COVID-19, cause more serious illnesses such as change in or loss of taste or smell, and symptoms develop 5 days after being infected. So these are the differences between influenza and COVID-19. So how are they related to each other? So both influenza and COVID-19 are contagious respiratory illnesses. Let's see if you really learned the discussion of the linear text and nonlinear text and how to transcode the information from these types of text. Now, you are going to create a graphical presentation about your daily study plan, especially in answering your self-learning modules or your learning activity sheet. You're going to choose the appropriate nonlinear text to illustrate the information. This is the rubric on grading your study plan. It is composed of the content or the accuracy, mechanics, organization, and creativity. It has a total of 40 points. Tell me what have you learned in this lesson. So try to complete the statement. Let us have this short quiz. Please get your ball pen and your paper and write your answers. Question number 1. What type of text is shown in picture number 1? Question number 2. To what type of text does picture number 2 belong? Question number 3. What kind of graph uses portions or slices to represent numerical proportions or percentages of a given whole as shown in picture number 2? What kind of graph is number 2? Question number 4. What is the author's ranking of her 3 best movie genres based on picture number 1? Question number 5. Based on the percentages in the given graph in picture number 2, what are the 3 audiences' favorite movies with the highest percentages? Rank them from 1 to 3. For the question number 1, the answer is a linear text. So the picture number 1 is an example of a linear text. For question number 2, so picture number 2 is an example of a nonlinear text. For question number 3, this picture is an example of a pie graph. For question number 4, the author's ranking of her 3 best movie genres based on picture number 1 are as follows. Rank 1 is adventure, Rank 2 is comedy, and rank 3 is science fiction. And for the last number, number 5, based on the percentages given in picture number 2, the author's favorite movies with the highest percentages are rank 1, comedy, so the orange part, 33%. Rank 2 is horror, the blue one, 24%. And rank 3 is action, the purple one, third. That ends our discussion of the linear and nonlinear text. So now, it's your time to create a graphical presentation of your family's budget plan. You're going to choose the appropriate nonlinear text to illustrate the information. We are going to make use the same rubrics in grading your output. Take note of the content or the accuracy, the mechanics, organization, and creativity.